Hello, today I'm going to talk about how to create a smoother looking mesh from a segmentation in Brain Voyager. This video is done to help my colleague Kenshu Koiso, who is a PhD student in Maastricht University in the Faculty of Psychology and Neuroscience Perception Group. So in the context of this video, I have three files to think about. So first is a pre-processed anatomical image. So I'm not going to talk about how this image can be processed maybe better or in different ways. I just roll with whatever we have right now. Okay, so this is the brain extracted. I see some filtered anatomical image. Then we have a segmentation that Kenshu performed on this image. And from that segmentation, he also generated a mid-gray matter file. Okay, so if I press Command T in macOS, I can switch between different views. And as you can see, I'm now moving in the slice direction. And essentially the issue with this segmentation file is that it has a lot of crumbles around these yellow voxels. You see it looks a bit like in, out, in, out. And this will lead to some like maybe a bit more rough looking meshes. So just to demonstrate here, we can create a mesh directly. So meshes, create mesh. Click on reconstruct. And here you can see that I have a partial part of the brain reconstructed. And as you can see, it looks a bit crumbly. And there are a few other issues with this mesh, because I see there's a floating piece here that will cause us trouble in the future. Maybe another floating piece there, you can see. So we need to somehow regularize this mesh a bit further. And you can also see that because Kenshu is only studying the visual cortex, he spent the most of his effort to get a nice segmentation in the visual lobe, in the occipital lobe of the brain. That's why we do not have the whole brain here. So another issue I have noticed with this segmentation and mesh is that this little hole, which corresponds to actually a ventricle, let's put it here. So this and these guys are ventricles. I can show that also definitively using the file for a secondary VMR. So after loading the secondary VMR, I can use F8 to switch between different visualization modes. So you can see that here, I overlaid the segmentation that we generated the mesh from in the volume. And using F9, I can switch between different modes here. And this mode, where we only see the yellow boundaries, is quite useful because here, you can really get at what I'm talking about. So this piece is actually ventricle, and it's better to include it as a part of white matter. So I recommend Kenshu to just fill this part in and do not leave it there as a hole inside the mesh. But fine, now we are going to just roll with this file and try to see how we can make better quickly inside Brain Voyager. So not using any other tools around. Okay, so let's open the file where we created the mesh from, this segmentation file. So one way to quickly create a nicer looking smoothed mesh is to use some morphological operations together with a bit of smoothing and maybe grow region to get rid of the floating pieces. So just to maybe show you a zoomed view, I'm going to focus on one view now. Let's focus on this one. First thing I'm going to do is to open this 3D volume tools menu and go to the segmentation tab and use the marked button. So these buttons work nicely with this new value that is written here. So it is 240, and you can see that when I hover over with my mouse cursor, you can see that the intensity of this blue region is 240 and intensity of the yellow region is 235. This is just an integer numerical value that is written in the file. So when I do here 240 and say marked, you can see that it only loads the marked files, which means that effectively it gets rid of the yellow boundaries. This is basically equivalent to doing a erosion operation. So once I did this erosion operation, Now I'm going to change the range of the values. So minimum is 100, maximum is 255. So 240 is inside that range. And now I'm going to click on one of those white matter voxels and just say, and then change the new value to 100 instead of 240 and say grow region. Okay, now after using grow region and changing my values to 100, what I'm going to do is basically only refresh those values so that if there are any hanging pieces outside of the brain that is not connected to this set of boxes, it will be removed. Say marked. And now I have this eroded and floating pieces removed version of my segmentation. So from here, I can re-click on the grow region to make these values to 100. And now I am at a good stage to use smoothing. Because when you do, I did this because it's easier to understand when you have ranges from 0, that is outside, and the segmented region, this is 100. After smoothing, you will basically interpolate any voxel between 0 and 100, so it is easy to kind of think about and demonstrate stuff. To do that smoothing, I can basically look at this filter smoothing menu in this 3D volume tools in Brain Voyager and click on, with the default parameters, Gaussian smoothing. So you can see that it applied Gaussian smoothing because now I have values, intensity, that is not only 0 and 100, but something in between. If I want to do extra, you can click one more time here to smooth a bit more. But I think it's already more than enough, this smoothing. So what I need to do right now to create a segmentation file out of this is to re-bin or re-binarize this smooth integer file. To do that, I can go here and set my minimum to 50 and maximum to 100. And as a new value, I can put 240. And when I click to range button, you can see that any value between 50 and 100 now is assigned to 240. To get rid of the values below 50, what I need to do is to set my minimum to 0, maximum to 50, and as the new value, set 0 here and do range. And this made outside of the now labeled area 0. So now we have only 0 and 240. Remember that we have eroded this segmentation. And that was done to basically preserve the shape of the overall shape of the value. It is like when you have very thin sulcus, if you apply too much smoothing, you will get rid of the sulcus and like sulci will merge into each other. We don't want that, so that's why we did a bit of eroding. But now let's say that I want to dilate area back. To do that, it is very easy, and you just go here and say border dilate. So you can see that this dilated border become now yellow. It is often useful to not only do this, but also click one time on the prepare button. And maybe you notice that there was a little region there that now become yellow. There's like some technical detail there, but this prepare button is needed before we create the mesh. Okay, so now maybe let's save this file with a different name. Save as, let's call it smooth. And now let's compare it with the version of the segmentation before and after. To do that, I can go to File and load a secondary VMR. And I can choose my initial segmentation. Okay. So now using F8 button, I can switch between these two representations. So you can see that indeed what we did worked, and the area that was very crumbly around these yellow voxels become much more smooth. We can also have a look at it from different views. Maybe here. See. And let's have a look at some other areas. So overall, our whole geometry is much smoother. Now, using this, we can create the mesh again. So let's go here and create mesh. Click on reconstruct. And now we have a new brain mesh. To make the comparison maybe more striking, I can now go here and load from the meshes an additional mesh that we have generated before with the initial version of the segmentation. Add mesh and choose the previous file. So it loads on top of our current mesh. Therefore, now I want to shift it in space so that I can compare more easily. To do that, I go to meshes and spatial transformations. And here, make sure to click on equal source for the dimensions. And let's give it a bit of a shift on x-axis. I entered 100 to x and I click on apply. I click 2 times, it apply 2 times, and now I have effectively shifted the initial mesh to left. So this is a nice way to, or easy way to compare before and after. Whether your smoothing worked, whether you smooth too much or too little, you can look at this and optimize the parameters. For instance, one thing to notice is that you can see that the floating piece that is on the, like that is hanging around here is completely gone there. That's good for us. And this crumbling visuals, these voxel shapes are mostly gone. They look much more smooth. Of course, this is just the first steps of the mesh creation. We can often go here to meshes and do advanced mesh smoothing. So maybe let's apply advanced mesh smoothing to both meshes one time and see also before after how what we did in the volume space helped with the triangular mesh spaces. So now the advanced smoothing is applied. If I click on scene overview, this menu allows me to switch between active meshes. So you can see that my currently active mesh is the initial version. Now I can go to the smoothed version, click there, current. And now the advanced mesh smoothing will work on my new mesh. Apply. Okay, see, so these are the two meshes after advanced smoothing. We can zoom into the details. You can see that there are these like little, maybe spikes, little spikes that are hanging, or this floating piece there. Whereas these are gone to a very large extent in my volume smoothed reconstructed mesh. Okay, so that's it for today. This is just a step to show you how to get a smoother looking mesh from your segmentation file. I hope this helps you, Kenshu, and see you in the next video. Bye.